This is David Mukaman. Today we're going to talk about the SQL Server core concepts. First, let's talk about what SQL Server is. You might think that SQL Server is a database, but that's only partially correct. Instead, it's better to think of SQL Server as a relational database management system, or what is commonly abbreviated as an RDBMS. The key word here is management. SQL Server manages all of the tasks associated with creating new databases and their components, such as tables, storing and retrieving data from those database tables, and acts as a gatekeeper through the management of end-user logins and the verification of access permissions. SQL Server also provides options for automating services, such as creating database backups on a regular schedule, and continuously monitors activities and can reconfigure itself to ensure that actions that end users are performing are optimized for peak performance. So you can see that SQL Server is much more than just a place to store your valuable data. It's an entire management system that provides a number of services to ensure that your data is protected, secure, and accessible. Because of its nature as a server-class software, SQL Server is typically always running on the computer it's installed on, and it listens for incoming requests and commands from connected users. When it receives communication, the server performs the required tasks and then serves back data or information back to the user that requested it for it. In most production environments, SQL Server would be installed on a dedicated machine or a clustered group of interconnected machines. End users would log in remotely from their own computers to access the databases that they wanted information from. However, SQL Server can also be installed on a local personal computer, in the cloud, or in an isolated container. These approaches provide a lot of flexibility in where the server software is actually running and how users can access them. And I will show you how to install SQL Server using each of these methods in my coming movies. As a bonus, installing SQL Server on your own PC, in the cloud, or using a container is a much cheaper way to get experience with the platform, without having to purchase dedicated and expensive server-grade hardware. A single SQL Server installation is called an instance, and each instance can hold many individual databases under its umbrella. You might have one database to track your product offerings and inventory, and a separate database to contain employee personal records, or operating from the same SQL Server instance. Multiple instances of SQL Server can be installed on a single computer, which helps administrators control access and manage resources, or even run different versions of SQL Server on the same hardware. When connecting to a computer writing multiple SQL Server instances, you will need to specify the name or IP address of the computer, as well as the name of the specific instance that you want to access before you can log in. Once logged in, you can start sending commands that you want the server to perform. So how do you do that? Well, at the heart of SQL Server, as its name would imply, is something called SQL. SQL stands for Structured Query Language. It's a standardized way that users interact with most database platforms on the market today. The specific implementation of SQL that Microsoft SQL Server uses, or the dialect if you prefer, is called Transact SQL. You'll often hear people refer to this as Transact SQL or simply T-SQL, depending on who you're talking to. With the T-SQL language, you will be able to ask or query the database for information, filter and sort records, and combine tables together in order to retrieve exactly the information that you need in the order and format that's required for any situation. You will also use T-SQL to run administrative commands such as changing the permission granted to a user, or creating new tables or other database objects. To work with SQL Server and send Transact SQL commands, you'll need to install additional piece of software. By itself, SQL Server offers a command line interface. Many system administrators will issue commands using Transact SQL scripts sent directly to the server using this command line interface. However, it's not a very intuitive environment to work with when you're first getting started with the platform. As an alternative, you can install a graphical interface. Microsoft provides additional program called Management Studio that most database professionals use in order to get a graphical user interface similar to Windows File Explorer. It's a separate add-on program that isn't required, but we shall install it to help us get used to the server's operation and ease us into writing our own T-SQL commands in a more friendly environment. The problem is that Management Studio is a Windows-only application. I'll be using a Windows computer and Management Studio throughout. But if you're interested in working with SQL Server on a Linux or a Mac or computer, you'll take a look at a different graphical interface called the Azure Data Studio. It provides much of the same functionality as Management Studio, but is cross-platform and can run on any operating system. So that's enough to get started. The next step is to install both of the components that we need to set up our working environment. The SQL Server instance will provide the backend database management services, and a Management Studio will give us a user-friendly graphical front-end interface.